Hello everyone, and following my first video on the Najdorf, here comes the second part where I'm going to make a, let's say, very general description of a repertoire that I have suggested and prepared for a DVD for chess base on the Najdorf. And well, let's jump into it immediately by going into the Sicilian Najdorf. E4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4 takes, knight f6, knight c3, and a6, which is the starting position of the Najdorf variation, this little move a6, which is flexible on the one hand, but also prepares a further expansion by black on the queen side with b5. So clearly starting or attempting to start the usual minority attack in the Sicilian, which can be seen in various variation and lines in the Sicilian. And here a6 clearly a useful move. I've mentioned it in the first video. White has an incredible number of possibilities here available, and basically there are variations for white which can be seen as more quiet and others which are very sharp. And for the black side, obviously, one needs to be ready against either strategies by white. And a first question which white has to try and determine for himself or herself is where is he going or she going to castle? Short side or long side? And this is not always clear what he wants to do, but it will basically determine more or less the character of the fight. Usually we say that if white castles on the short side, the position is, or the fight is going to be a little more quiet, whereas if white decides to castle long, it's going to be a sharp game, usually with both sides having opposite castling, so white on the queen side, black on the king side, and basically each side launching a fierce and very rapid attack on his own wing. On the king side for white, on the queen side for black, usually the game is very sharp. And as I've mentioned in the first video again, it's very important for you to understand the main ideas which lie behind the Najdorf if you intend to play it as black. And actually it's also useful if you want to play it with white, of course. But basically if you manage and you understand the basic strategic ideas by black, you can fare all right, let's say up to a certain level. If you start facing titled players or very experienced club players, they will know their openings, and then clearly some concrete knowledge will be absolutely necessary, especially in certain sharp variations. And we are going to look at them, and I'm going to describe again very generally the kind of repertoire I would like to offer you. Let's start with perhaps the more quiet ways to play, which can be seen with bishop e2, which is a very quiet developing move, clearly hinting at white castling short very soon. Here e5 is the typical Najdorf move. Knight b3, bishop e7, castle is the usual move, and castle. And again here, this is the starting point of a topical position, which has been played throughout decades with top players inventing a few ideas here and there. But we can actually outline a few plans from here. First of all, white can decide to play, respectively to prepare, f4 very quickly. He can play it immediately. It's perhaps a little bit premature, so white can also start with a move like king h1 in order to put the king to the corner before opening that diagonal with f4. And well, let's say, well, black has basically various moves here. b6 is the main move, but there is also b5, not completely clear, bishop e6, knight c6, many moves can be played. But basically, let's take a move like b6 since it's the main move, and let's admit he plays f4. What you can usually have here is basically a typical pawn structure where, let's say after knight c6, if white decides to take here, you can take with the knight. And this pawn structure occurs very often in the Najdorf, not especially in this particular line, but in general. So the f2 pawn can be exchanged for the e5 pawn at some point when contact is established. And well, again, this structure has pros and cons for either side. There are isolated pawns on e4 for white, which I would like to remind you that is generally seen a very soft spot for white in the Sicilian, not just in the Najdorf, clearly a point which black would like to attack. And there is another isolated pawn for black on d6, where white can use perhaps that square on d5, the outpost on the semi-open file. So basically a very tense pawn structure, which leads to interesting fight. And this is actually what black is aiming for in the Najdorf, in the Sicilian in general, but more particularly in the Najdorf. It's a fighting opening, and it's no mystery the reason why Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov, two of the greatest players of all time, but also great fighters over the board, had the Najdorf as their main weapon against e4. Clearly, the Najdorf is an invitation to spoil for a fight, and black has dynamic possibilities, a lot of activity. Of course, it's not just one-sided, there is also risk entailed, but clearly if you want to play for a win, the Najdorf is clearly a good weapon and good choice for black. I will come back to the position after move 8, when f4 is one of the possibilities, but white clearly doesn't have to do it. He can also choose a more restrained, perhaps a more positional approach without pushing his f-pawn, or at least not two squares, just developing with bishop e3 is possible, and then trying to move slowly and use that square on d5, which I have already highlighted as clearly a soft spot also in black's camp, since it's a weak square which cannot be controlled by a black pawn. So clearly white can try and use it in order to increase his pressure along the d file, in the center, perhaps also on the queen side. So bishop e3 is possible, and here black has various strategies to play, but basically he will attempt to complete his development. The bishop will go to e6, the knight can choose to go to either d7 or c6 depending on the circumstances. So bishop e2, e5, knight b3, this is clearly one of the classical ways to play from the white side, a rather quiet one if we compare it with other aggressive possibilities. There is what we call the English attack with bishop e3 or f3. It can actually transpose very quickly after e5, knight b3, bishop e6, and now bishop e3. White's idea is to overprotect e4. He's not going to play f4, but f3 not only protects e4, but also supports the advance of the g pawn. So white basically would like to play queen d2, castle long, play g4, h4, just launch an attack. And this, if black is not ready, or if black doesn't know what to do, is definitely dangerous. There are many plans here, many variations available for black. I have chosen the popular h5 nowadays, which basically stops white's expansion on the king side, so no g4 is coming. Of course, h5 is not a perfect move either. It weakens g5. It also weakens generally the king side, where the black king is logically going to stay a little later after black castles. Of course, black can delay castling a little bit, but generally speaking, he's going to castle short at some point. So it's going to be, have to be well timed in order to be ready to attack, and so that white hasn't attacked too quickly. So this h5 has been advocated, among others, by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who nowadays is clearly the main supporter, an absolute top player who's the main supporter of the Najdorf. He actually plays it literally in almost all his games with black when facing e4. So f3, bishop e3, the English attack. Basically, I like this h5 idea because it stops white's attack In the meantime, black will complete development, and only then is he going to castle short. Of course, the fight is on. I mean, it's a very sharp position, and white has many ideas as well. But clearly, I think if you know your ideas, if you know your plans for black, it's going to be okay here. In most cases here, on most white's sixth moves, we're going to play e5, as mentioned, and h3, this popular idea, this popular move, is no exception. Here again we play e5. What's actually the idea of h3? Well, logically, as you have heard what I've said in the English attack after f3, the idea is basically the same. White is gonna go g4, and he might use his f-pawn, not just to go to f3, but to go to f4 in some lines, and increasing the pressure on the king side, perhaps also in the center. So a very interesting and aggressive move. It may look a little bit suspicious and strange at first sight, but basically it's an aggressive setup, going h3 to play g4. And here again, e5 is an entirely viable possibility, when the knight can actually go back to either b3, f3, or e2. Generally, I also say that a good way to follow up with black generally is to play h5. Very similar to the English attack, trying to stop g4 with the same drawbacks and basically the same ideas, except that of course there are subtleties. The pawn is on h3 and not on f3. Well, all this can be or is actually looked at very deeply in my DVD. And well, if we consider the only two lines which are also very important, where black doesn't play e5 but e6, those are bishop c4. Here this line has gone more or less out of fashion, clearly, but it used to be played by Bobby Fischer with white when he would face his favorite Najdorf as well. So Bobby Fischer was an advocate of bishop c4, and in most recent years we had games by Morozevich, but not only. So bishop c4, e6. Now white usually play the preventive move bishop b3, because the bishop might be exposed to some d5, some points. So bishop b3, b5, and here again castling short is a possibility. There is an older plan, which is to try and use that bishop on b3 very directly by pushing the pawn. I'm going to actually play it f4 in order to try and play f5 and force some decision by this pawn on e6. Is black going to play e5? Is black going to try and support this pawn on e6 in order to kind of try and mute the bishop on b3? Those are questions which black has to answer, but basically by trying to counter attack against e4, he usually gets enough counterplay here, and we have a few nice games won by black, Bobby Fischer among others, when he had to face bishop c4. But this is another, and this was actually another epocha. And nowadays we go for mostly for castling, bishop e7 and queen f3, which is a little strange at first sight, because why would white want to block his own f-pawn? But the queen is actually going to g3, anticipating the castle here, castling on short side, which cannot happen because there is of course also a threat to play e5. So black plays queen c7 or queen b6 so that he can play bishop b7 in case of e5. And after queen g3 we can castle, bishop h6 can come, knight to e8. The game is rather quiet at the moment, but it can easily heat up in the next few moves. And we have a few very nice games by Boris Gelfand and by Gary Kasparov also is black. So basically all the greats had to face bishop c4 at some point in their career, and we can only learn from their legacy, from the games they have left for us. I've mentioned Boris Gelfand, and basically for me the greatest challenge when preparing the DVD and trying to determine which repertoire I was going to offer was the question what to do against bishop g5. Bishop g5, this is a move which clearly leads to very concrete play. It's not, I won't say it's not possible, but it's very difficult to orientate just by general guidelines, by plans, by typical ideas. Of course, there are typical plans and so on, but play here, the play after bishop g5 becomes extremely concrete, and bishop g5 is clearly a move which is unpleasant for me personally as black. I know other players who don't have problems to face it. The reason why it's a bit unpleasant for me is that I'm not a great fan of reciting opening variations for 25-30 moves and then game over, draw, or oh, my opponent played a great novelty, I lost. Too bad, I didn't play a game. So basically, I really like when I can rely on typical ideas and not too much on concrete lines. And therefore, clearly, it was a problem what to recommend to you. And that's when I decided to actually, and this is very important when you learn a new opening, you need a guide basically, players whom you can look after, you can look upon. And for me, clearly here, Boris Gelfand is the name. He's been a great Najdorf specialist and a great Najdorf player throughout his career, even though he started playing other openings more recently. But since his youth, he's played the Najdorf with great results. And I've mentioned Kasparov, Fischer. Of course, you can learn so much from studying their games, Vashilagrov as well, but also Boris Gelfand. And here I decided to recommend the line which he has played mostly against bishop g5. This is e6, f4, knight bd7, queen f3, queen c7, castle long, and b5. I mean, we haven't played 10 moves in the game, and you can already see how sharp the position is. Look, black has castle long, the rook is well placed. The king is not too much in danger, but we can easily imagine that black is going to try something to make it feel a little uncomfortable. But white's pieces are all very aggressively placed. The queen on f3, the bishop on g5, and very often white somehow gets that devil sacrifice knight d5 in. It can actually occur in almost every line with bishop g5. And well, here many lines are possible for white, containing sacrifices very early on. You can even sacrifice on b5 here. All of this is basically neutralized by black, don't worry, but it requires some theoretical knowledge. You need to learn some things by heart. You need to understand a few things. I chose this line. That's the reason why I chose this line for black, because it offers actually a mix between typical ideas, plans, which can be understood quite thematically by black, but of course requiring also some knowledge, theoretical knowledge. Again, having a guide, having an idol to follow when you learn an opening is crucial. It can be Gelfand, it can be Vashilagrov, it can be in any other opening. When I learned how to play the French defense with black, I took the book by Wolfgang Ullmann with several ideas in several lines, and this was clearly my guide there. And thanks to this, I managed to get some ideas of my own, develop a few ideas. I wouldn't like everything he recommended, but basically I was able to form or to build my repertoire on that and basically expand it a little bit. And I think this is a very interesting way as well to study openings. So basically, I think I have more or less covered the main lines, let's say the classical main lines, because I have kept the third video for new trends in the Najdorf from the white side. And well, I hope that you're looking forward to listening to them, because there are going to be a few interesting points in that.